at this point, it's not really a negotiation anymore. Like, both sides are moving. So I feel like we need to continue to have these conversations, continue to actually have change implemented for us to move on our stance. And so we as players, we don't want to strike. We want to have a season. I love playing basketball. That's all I want to do. But again, there's things that need to be handled, and we want to do it as professionals.
So you look at our deal, the union's deal, or the league's deal, it's like both of them are not ready. Both are not ready to be voted on because both need to be negotiated either up or down or in a number of ways.
We are still not making enough. That middleman potentially still not making enough for housing to also be taken off of the table. You all know this New York market. that $200,000 jump that players are going to make, that's before taxes, that's before what they would have to pay for a potential housing market in the state of New York. So I still am focused on our middleman again. I think it's a starting point. I'm happy with them finally coming back to us with a proposal, but I think there's a lot more that we can do to protect our middleman, even with our jump of salary.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to TFD. We are officially at that pressure point, the 11th hour, and you can feel the tension shifting. It's thick, it's awkward, and it's loud. Now you're starting to see which players truly don't want this thing dragging out any longer. You're seeing the ones who are itching to lace up, get back on the hardwood, and protect not just their checks, but the momentum of this entire league. Because, let's be honest, this isn't just about one season. This is about the future of the WNBA. And when negotiations stall, when talks slow down, it creates uncertainty. Younger players are looking at opportunity. Veterans are looking at legacy. And that difference in perspective, it's starting to show, and it's not subtle. A few months back, Clark spoke up and said, "We've got to get back on the court. We've got to do this for the fans." And a lot of people criticized her, calling it anti-union. But now, you're hearing similar tones from players like Kelsey Plum and Paige Bakers. So the question becomes, is this division or is this reality setting in? Because the clock is ticking and everybody feels it, whether they admit it or not. Today, there's an article that was posted on Front Office Sports, and it says, an ESPN executive says that Clark is a gateway drug to women's sports. It also says Clark boosts TV ratings, but an ESPN executive said the surge in women's sports will outlast her temporary absence. An ESPN executive said, "I say this in quite literally the most positive way possible. Caitlin is a gateway drug for some people to women's sports. If that brought you in, I'm going to keep you here. And I'm not going to make you feel silly if you don't get it. Or if you still think, oh, is that rating because of the Clark effect? Well, she's been out of college basketball for a while now. I'm going to tell you why it is more than that, and that's okay if you came for her. Now I'm going to tell you why it's necessary for you to stay here." Okay, listen, I've got kind of mixed opinions about that quote, and I'm going to try to articulate this the best way I can without sounding crazy. First off, let's just be real. The Clark effect is absolutely real. It's undeniable. A huge portion of the ratings we saw over the last year was because of Clark. A lot of new eyes came into the WNBA specifically because of her. That's not shade to anybody else. That's just facts. She moved the needle in a way we haven't seen in a long time. Period. But here's the thing. I think once people came for Clark, many of them stayed for other players. They discovered athletes they didn't even know existed before. They started following different teams, not just the Indiana Fever. They learned storylines. They picked favorites. That ripple effect matters. That's what growth actually looks like, not fake hype, not forced narratives. So when someone says she's a gateway, I understand the business angle of that. Now, the article also talked about ESPN adding new programming, a Sunday evening show called Women's Sports Sundays on ESPN. And listen, I think it's cool they're investing in women's sports coverage. That part? Love it. But if I'm being honest, the name feels a little lazy. It doesn't feel creative. It feels like the safest possible title you could come up with, like zero imagination. But okay, at least the coverage is expanding. Where I start to feel conflicted is with that line, "Now I'm going to tell you why it's necessary for you to stay here." Necessary? I think that wording bothers me a little, and maybe this is me speaking as an athlete, but I don't want people watching women's sports because they feel like they have to. I don't want it to feel like homework. I don't want it to feel like social responsibility. I want people watching because they genuinely enjoy the product, because the games are competitive, because the players are skilled, because the storylines are compelling, because on a random Tuesday night, they'd rather watch a WNBA game than a reality show or another sport. That's real respect, not forced sympathy. That's what respect looks like. I wouldn't want someone tuning into my show just because I'm a woman. I'd want them watching because they're entertained, informed, or they just like the vibe. That's it. Choice matters. Interest matters. Organic fandom matters. You can't bully people into caring. Sometimes the conversation around women's sports drifts into this territory where it sounds like you should support this. And that tone can unintentionally make it feel like a charity case. And I hate that. Women's sports are not a charity. The athletes aren't asking for pity views. They're asking for fair coverage and an opportunity to compete on a stage where the product can speak for itself, not because fans have some level of guilt. And then there's the other part of the quote, "I'm not going to make you feel silly if you don't get it." That's another phrase that made me pause. What does "don't get it" even mean? People just like what they like. Some people love basketball, some prefer football, some like hockey, some don't like sports at all and would rather watch a game show. That doesn't mean they don't get it, it just means their taste is different. It's not that deep. You can't force connection. You can't manufacture passion. What you can do is present something compelling enough that people choose it. That's the difference between real growth and artificial hype. So yeah, I have mixed emotions. I appreciate the recognition that Clark helped bring people in. I appreciate that networks are investing more. But I don't love the framing that staying is necessary or that people need to be guided into understanding why they should care. That tone can backfire fast. The best validation for women's sports is simple. People watch because they want to, because it's exciting, because it's elite competition, because it stands on its own. No guilt trip required. Anyway, I'm stepping off the soapbox now. I probably went deeper than I planned, but that's just how I feel about it.
Here they went on to say that Piotrkowski added that Clark went out with an injury in July and never returned for the rest of the season, and ESPN still had its most-watched WNBA regular season and WNBA playoffs. The season overall saw a 3% bump in viewership, though the 4 most-watched games of the season were all Fever games from before Clark got injured. And that's really the news right there. Because if we go back to last season, you have to remember how the whole Clark injury situation was handled. Yes, she got hurt, but the messaging around it always left the door open. The injury report kept suggesting she could return. There was talk that she might even be back in time for the playoffs. There was never a firm "she's done for the season" announcement. She was still on the bench every game, still traveling with the Indiana Fever, still signing autographs before tip-off, still visible. And that visibility matters. If halfway through the year the league had come out and said, "she's officially out for the season," I honestly believe we would have seen a much sharper drop in ratings, because we already saw what happened when she first went down. Viewership reportedly dipped nearly 50%, not just for Fever games, but across the WNBA as a whole. Now, yes, overall numbers still finished up, and that's a positive. Growth is growth. But let's not twist the data to pretend her presence, even sidelined, didn't heavily influence the audience. The interest was still largely tied to her story, her possible return, and her impact. That context matters when we're talking about ratings. Here they said, "I think every single one of us can say what Caitlin has done for our business is incomparable," Piotrkowski added. However, people are coming because the product is excellent, and they are not leaving. Gold Onwude chimed in that Caitlin has been huge, but added that, "I think just the entire ecosystem of women's basketball is rising. Not everyone was ready to discuss elite female athletes properly. And look, I don't want to gatekeep either," Gold Onwude said. But as far as having the facts, being able to pronounce the names, you'd be surprised the discomfort in that. "There were some crazy things that came out of your network," she said to Piotrkowski. When Rosalind Gold Onwude said that, she was absolutely calling out ESPN. And honestly, I'm glad she did. Because we've all seen it. There have been way too many moments in women's basketball coverage where commentators couldn't even pronounce the athletes' names correctly. That's not a small mistake. That's basic professionalism. We even saw it during the Unrivaled season, and it was uncomfortable to watch. If you're assigned to cover a league, the bare minimum is knowing who the players are and how to pronounce their names. And don't forget the women's draft. There are only a handful of players invited, around 12 prospects sitting right there in front of you, and some of them were still called by the wrong names on broadcast. I was genuinely embarrassed watching that. There's no excuse for it. You get the list ahead of time. If you don't know how to pronounce a name, you ask. That's part of the job. So when Rosalind Gold-Onwude pointed out that not everyone was ready to discuss elite female athletes properly, she wasn't wrong. That's accountability, and accountability matters if we want the coverage to improve. This goes back to the bigger point. Women's sports are not a charity project. You can't just assign random reporters who've never covered the women's game and expect elite-level analysis. If networks are serious about the growth of women's basketball, then the coverage has to match the quality of the product. Preparation, respect, and real knowledge, that's the standard. Anyway, then they went on to talk about the Women's Sports Sunday show. Here they said, this was done very, very intentionally because the marketplace demands it and the fan demands it. Piotrkowski told FOS about the move. What we are creating is a true standalone franchise. This is our Monday Night Football. That's a little extreme, I'm not gonna lie. Comparing it to Monday Night Football is bold. But at the same time, you can tell they're excited about this Women's Sports Sunday show. They're trying to build it into something major, something that feels like appointment television. And ambition isn't a bad thing. We'll just have to see how it performs and whether fans truly embrace it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for daily updates.